Hello, welcome to White Davy Garden and Worm Farm. Thank you for joining the live. How are you guys doing today? So far, I'm doing okay. Yes, we have snow. We haven't had snow in a good while, in a few weeks, but today it's quite snowy. I think they say we're going to be getting 10 inches of snow. I'm not looking forward to that because I have to go and look after my worm farm right after the live. And it is snowing pretty heavily, so I'm not very happy about it. But what can I do, right? You just gotta take it one day at a time. Okay, so today we're gonna be talking about how you guys learn about worm farming. It's always a pretty interesting topic because we all learn about it different ways. Yeah. Oh, hi, Han. How are you? Yes, and we all have different reasons why we get into worm farming too. So if you don't mind sharing, that would be good. You might notice that I'm in a different surrounding today because, as most of you who follow my live discussion know, that we have internet issues from time to time. So we had to hardwire our daughter's computer to the internet in the classroom or office. So now I can't have her moving her laptop because she's hardwired to the internet. So I have to move. Yeah. So on Fridays, I'm going to always be in a different location from the norm. Alicia, I hope I got Alicia. Okay, sorry. I'm half blind, so don't mind me if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Alicia, right? Looks so much like an A. Yes, how are you guys doing? How did you guys get started in worm farming? Are you a worm farmer, Alicia? What is the best housing unit for vermicompost? Are you referring to the type of worm bin that you can use for your vermicomposting? For me, I got started in worm farming 6 years ago. Didn't know anything about worm farming before then. It took me a week to hear about worm farming and get started. Yeah, so because of how cold it is in my region, it takes forever to make compost. And most of you know that I love to do organic gardening. So I wanted compost and I wanted it really fast. Okay, you're just starting. Okay. Yeah, so I take it then that you're asking about the type of worm bin. Yes. Okay, good. So that depend on your circumstance. I did a video on it yesterday about how you can choose the right type of worm bin, so you can check that out. So there are many factors that determine the type of worm bin that you're going to be using. For some people, they can have their worm farm outdoors all year round. For some, they might have it in the garage or they might have it in their house. And if they're having it in their house, it depends on where in the house they can keep it. For some, it is in their basement. Some might be in the kitchen. It might be in their living room. It depends. So the type of worm bin that you're going to choose is going to depend on where you're going to keep it. That's the first thing you need to consider, where you're going to keep it, because depending on whether you have tropical condition year round or you experience mild winters or harsh winters, okay, you're in 9B and you're an organic gardener. Right. So if you're in zone 9B, then take it that chances are you can keep your worms outdoor year round. So then the type of worm bin that you get It's going to be determined by how cold your winter is, which I think will not be very cold. So, what you want to have then, okay, you're keeping them outdoors, you're in Florida and it is hot. So, you don't want a very deep bin if you're in regions that are very hot. If you have space in your yard where there is shade, where you can keep your worms cool, then that will be ideal. So whatever worm bin you're going to choose, make sure that it is one that is not going to produce so much heat that it kills your worms. So one of the things that you can do is a pallet system where it has, you know how pallets are made up. You can put in a few pieces more board just to fill in the gaps that are there. But pallet system for outdoor worm bin is one that will allow a good amount of airflow through your worm bin and keeping it cool for you. Because you're in a region that is hot, you might want to consider raising your African night crawlers or your red wrigglers or your blue worms. The blue worms and the African night crawlers, these are the worms that are most tolerant to eat. So those might be your best option. Red wrigglers work too because there are quite a lot of worm farmers in Florida who raise red wrigglers. Some of them use the tiered system, so like the stackable worm bins that you have to purchase. Usually they range from anything over $100 and upwards into $300, depending on the type you're getting. So I know of worm farmers in Florida who use that, but they have it indoors and not outdoors. You can use totes and various types of worm bin, but the most important thing is that you have to have it in a shade and you have to make sure that it is going to have sufficient airflow to keep them cool. Now, the next thing that you need to consider, if you're using things like totes or large garbage bin or any deep bin that does not allow a lot of airflow, then it is recommended that you put more holes in it than you would for normal worm bins. Red Wriggler is your choice. Okay. Yes. So you want to make sure you have a lot more holes in it than you would for normal other worm bins. So if you're using totes that are deep or any form of plastic worm bin that is deep, I don't recommend using any form of metallic worm bin if you're in a region that is hot. So say, for example, you're using tote or you're using a 55-gallon bin or whatever the size bin, as long as it is deep, you want to put holes not just on the top, on the upper portions of the sides. You want to put holes further down on it as well, because you want to increase the airflow. That is extremely important if you're in a hot region. And you need to make sure that you're aerating that bin as often as possible to keep your worms cool. So I'd recommend that when you maintain those bins, if you're using the stackable types, then it doesn't really matter that much because those bins are all shallow. But the deeper bins, every time you feed, if you feed once per week, I recommend that you would aerate them once per week. I wouldn't really recommend aerating them more than once per week. But yes, take a look at yesterday's video, and that can help you to determine the type of worm bin that you're going to choose, because you have to think about, is it something that you're going to be moving around? Because if it is something that you're going to be moving around, then you have to make sure that the size is one that is manageable. If it is something that is stationary, then it doesn't really matter that much. So there are many factors. So yesterday's video touched on some of the factors that you can use to determine that. Yes, and there are various steps that you can take on a hot day to ensure that the worms stay cool. And there are steps that you can take, because sometimes I know Florida do get cold. So there are steps that you can take also to keep them from getting too cold. So I hope that answered your question, Alicia. Yes, so I was talking about how I got started in vermicomposting. Yes, so in 2016, I was there looking at my compost and thinking, because I have like three large composting bin were made of pallets. So they're about 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 4 feet long. So as I was looking at all those compost pile, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have to wait an entire year before I can actually have compost. And the thing about it is that I can only have compost within a year if I'm hot composting. So I wanted to know how I could get compost faster. So I started doing a lot of research online to see how I can speed up the process. And then I saw this video about vermicomposting. And I was very surprised when I saw that, because I've never heard anything about composting with worms yet. I didn't even know people would raise worm for any reason at all, not even for fishing. I always thought, because in Jamaica we don't really raise worms for fishing, because anywhere you go in the yard and you dig, you will find worms. So that's how we would gather the worms for fishing. So I knew nothing about people raising worms. Yeah, so when I found that video about vermicomposting, I was quite shocked and quite excited too. So I went online and I started searching around in my region to see if I could find anyone who has composting worms to sell. Yeah, so I started looking around for people who sell composting worms. I found a few. Most of them are not in my region, they're in the other city. But most of who I found, they were like selling 10 worms, 100 worms, and stuff like that. But the video that I was watching, it recommended starting with a pound of worms. I'm like, 100 worms is not a pound of worms. So, and then they're quite pricey. They were like very expensive, because you were paying something like $20 for 10 worms or something of the sort, but it was expensive. But then I found this lady that sells worms by the pound. So I got in touch with her and she brought the worms here. She installed them in she put a few in my garden. She put most of them, divided in two, and put them in my compost bin. So that is how I got started. But man, did I know nothing about vermicomposting. Hi, Patricia. How are you? It's been a while. I hope you're doing well. Let's see. Han says, I started my two large bin because of you. Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad to know I'm able to get others started. Let's see. I would like to invite you to my Facebook group, Living Off the Land, Organic Living and Gardening. I have a lot of members who are interested. Okay, awesome. Awesome. I was using my personal Facebook account for my vermicomposting, but I recently changed that. So now I'm using White Davy Garden Worm Farm. So that's the my Facebook account. So I'll definitely check out your Facebook group. Thanks for letting me know. And 365 days of sheer positivity. Alicia Richmond. Okay. I think you're awesome. Oh, thank you. What do you mean, composting worms? Composting worms just refer to the worms that you use to make your compost. So whether it is, or to make your worm casting, so whether it is red wriggler, African night crawlers, European night crawlers, whatever worms you use in your worm bin, those are composting worms. So a lot of people know it by different terms. So some people will say composting worms, some will say vermicomposting, or um, worm farming. They're just different terms that people use, but it all refers to the same thing. Some say vermiculture, but it all refers to the same thing. Yes, they can be quite expensive, but looking at the benefits that we get from them, I think they are quite worth it. It's very well worth it to spend that initial cost. What is important now is that after you've made that, spend that large sum of money to acquire your worms, is to do your best to ensure that you keep them alive so that you don't have to keep going back and buying because the first set didn't make it, which is the focus of my channel and my Facebook page. Is always to help other gardeners and worm farmers so that they don't have to keep making the same mistakes, that they can learn from other people's mistake and learn how to avoid making those mistakes, and if they do make the mistake, how they can correct it. So that is the focus of my channel. It is always to be able to help our fellow gardeners. Do you keep the soil wet? Are you talking about the soil in the worm bin? Yes, it has to be moist because worm breathe through their skin, and without the moisture on their skin, they cannot breathe. So they will eventually die, and it doesn't really take long for your worms to die if they don't have enough moisture. In fact, they will, if they don't have enough moisture in the bin, they actually take the moisture from their bodies and send it to their skin to ensure that they can breathe. But when that happens, it stunts their growth and it makes them so skinny. And if they don't get enough moisture fast enough, they will eventually die. So, yes, you have to keep it moist, and you have to be careful though of how much moisture you have in the bin, because if you have too much moisture in the bin, that can rob them of the oxygen in the bin as well, because that moisture, the excess moisture, is going to fill up all the air pockets that are in the bin, and then they won't have the proper airflow to keep them going. So that is one thing that you need to keep in mind when you're looking after these little guys. Yes. The good thing about them though is that without enough moisture in the bin, they can go for a little bit. They always tend to gather together in the little whatever damp spot, because the bin, as you know, it will dry out from the outer ends and dry towards the middle. So as it dries toward the middle, they will tend to move towards where the moisture is. So sometimes you have a little grace period where if your bin dries out, they can hide away in that center of the bin. So you know how it is. Sometimes we might be on par with maintaining our worm bin, but sometimes something might come up where, for whatever reason, you don't get to look after your worms for that week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Because I know some people maintain their bin daily, some do it weekly, some do it bi-weekly or monthly. So sometimes something can come up and you don't really have the time to look after them. So if that is the case, then sometimes they can just find themselves in the center of that bin, but you want to get to them as quickly as possible to ensure that you're not losing them. But you don't want to, especially when you're getting started, it is very easy to forget that you have them, unless of course you have been planning for them for a pretty long time, then they're constantly on your mind. But if it is a case where you just learn about them and then you get into it, sometimes you can forget about them, and then when you go back you might find that you have lost some or all of them, or you might find them in time where you can rescue them all. Hopefully that's not the case. So as a beginner, I recommend that you keep a scheduled time when you look after them, because that makes it easier for you to remember. So, say for example, you're going to look after them once per week. You set a day, and if possible, a time of day when you look after them, because once you get into that routine, then sometimes you don't even have to plan ahead. It just in your mind, okay, today at 12 noon, I'm going to be looking after my worms, and it makes it so much easier. Yes. So, I have started a series on Wednesdays where I do worm farming tips for beginners. For those who have been following that series, I apologize, but last week I did not upload the video that I was supposed to. And Wednesday gone, I didn't, so I uploaded that video yesterday. So I'm going to be, when I can find the time, creating a playlist specifically for that so that beginners can actually go to that playlist and get the information that they need. Yeah, so anyway, my apologies for that. I will try to make it as consistent as possible, but these days I am just bombarded with a lot that needs to be done. So it's a challenge to maintain my original routine, but hopefully by the end of the month, I will get everything back on track. But I will try my best, even if I'm not uploading on other days, I will try my best to ensure that that series is maintained because I know a lot of beginners are looking forward to that one. Let's see, Alicia says, I am confused. I don't understand how you use the compost. Do you separate compost and worms and then add more yard waste to produce more fertilizer? Okay, so how the process works, you get your worm bin and you had bedding. For your bedding, you can use various material. So you can use various material like shredded newspaper, shredded paper, shredded cardboard. You can use dried leaves and stuff like that for your bedding, cocoa coir and others. Some use peat moss as well, mix it in. And then you're going to add your worms and gradually feed them food scraps or whatever else it is that you're going to be feeding to them. Now, usually between 3 to 6 months, depending on how many worms you started with and the condition that the worms are maintained in terms of moisture, temperature, and all, that is going to determine whether it takes 3 weeks or up to 6 weeks for you to have enough castings to harvest. So sometimes people refer to the worm castings or the vermicast as compost, but it is not really compost. It is vermicast or worm poop. So what you do is you have several ways that you can separate them. You don't want to take the entire content of your bin and turn it out into your garden because then you'll be losing your worms, right? So what you can do is you have several methods. You can top feed your bin. So over a period of time, the worms will eat what is in the bin, and then you add to the top of the bin. And when you're aerating the bin, you just aerate that portion of the bin where you have the bedding and the worms and the food scraps. The castings that's on the bottom, you're not going to be aerating that, just what's on the top. Then when you're ready to harvest your castings, you just take off that upper layer depending on the type of bin that you have. Take off that upper layer with the food scraps, the bedding, and the worms, and then you take out the castings that's in the bottom and use that in your garden. The next thing that you can do to separate them is to do the horizontal migration, where when you know that you reach the point where you're ready to harvest your castings, or close to the time when you're ready to harvest your castings, move all of the content in the worm bin, worms, everything in the worm bin to one side, and then you start adding new food scraps to the other side of the bin. Allow 2, 3, 4 weeks or even more. Most, not all of your worms will migrate over to the new food source. And then the what remained on the other side, you harvest, you take that out and use the castings from it. You may or may not choose to sift your castings, but that is entirely up to you. Sifting your casting does several things. One, it allows you to put back the food scraps that is unprocessed back into the worm bin. It allows you to separate the worms, the few worms that remain in the castings. It allows you to separate those ones from the castings, and then you can add them back to your worm bin. So yeah, so that is how you separate your bin, your worms. If you are using the flow-through system, then the castings will be at the bottom and you harvest your castings from the bottom of that bin, and you don't have to touch the worms the food scraps or the bedding that is in the upper portion of the bin. So there, it depends on the type of bin that you have, but those are the methods that you can use to separate them. I have videos on that too that goes in depth in discussing all the various ways that you can use to harvest your castings. Yes, so after you've harvested the castings and separated the worms, then you want to add more bedding to the worm bin and just continue feeding them the way you always do. Now, worm tea. Aikin, how are you? Worm tea is worm castings that has been diluted in water, and sometimes there are other additives added to it like molasses, sugar, or things of the sorts. And the reason they had molasses and things like that to the worm tea is because the sugar in it encouraged the growth of microbes. Yes, so worm tea you make by putting the worm castings in water. You may choose to aerate it or you might make it just stand still. Aerating it is the best way to go, and you have two ways that you can aerate. If you have a pump, then you can put the pump in the solution and let it aerate it. If you don't have a pump, then you can just stir the material, the content occasionally. So every day you want to stir it a few times, and you usually make your worm tea sit for 24 hours. So you're aerating it for 24 hours. Or if you're just steeping it, you steep it for 24 hours. That is when you get the most out of it. When you aerate, it increases the amount of microbes that are going to be in the worm tea, and the microbes are beneficial for your plants and for your soil. So that is why you want to aerate it. So if you have it in jugs, then you can just shake the jugs. If you have it in buckets and stuff like that, then you want to stir it. And then that is how you're going to encourage the microbes in it to keep growing. Now, if you're going to be making worm tea, keep in mind that worm tea has a shelf life of 3 days. After 3 days, it is no longer good. So you can use it to water your plants, but the benefits that you would get from it is not going to be there. The microbes will die off. If, however, you continue to aerate it for as long as you have it, you can have it forever. So if you say, for example, you've had it every day, you aerate it and you've had it for a whole week, a whole month, as long as you're aerating it, then it is still good. But if you stop aerating it, then after 3 days, it won't be good anymore. So it's just good for watering your plants at that point in time. Let's see, will you need to update the bin after you get so many worms? That depend on your circumstances and your preferences. So, for example, if you have a worm bin that can hold 2 pounds of worms, and you find that your worm population has grown to the point where you do have 2 pounds of worm in there, worms will regulate their population. So if the worms find that there are too many of them in the bin, they're going to regulate their population by slowing down their rate of reproduction. The adults in the bin may choose to leave the bin in order for the younger ones to survive. So if that is the case and you don't want to have another worm bin because it's just too much for you, or maybe that one bin is producing you enough castings to maintain your garden or whatever purpose you want it for, then if that is the case, then you don't need to worry. You just keep taking care of that one bin. The worms will control their population. If, however, you want more worms and you want more castings, whatever the case may be, then what you're going to do is to separate the worms. So you create another worm bin and you divide the content in two. Now, here is something that you need to keep in mind. Worms like a lot of space. The more space the worms have, the better they're going to be doing. You don't, however, want to have so few worms in a large worm bin because if it is if there are only a few worms in a large worm bin and it is going to take so long for the worms to find each other, then they're not going to be mating often enough to be producing enough cocoons for them to be populating the bin. So you don't want to have so few worms in a large bin that they can hardly ever meet each other. However, it is recommended that you have, per pound of worm that you have in your worm bin, you have at least 1 square foot of surface area for that pound of worms. So if you have 2 pounds of worms, your bin must not be smaller. The surface area of your bin must not be less than 2 square foot. No, it can be bigger. Bigger is better, but it must not be smaller than that. However, there is an exception to that rule because sometimes it is that your bin is deep but narrow. If that is the case, then what you want to do is ensure that the content in your bin is high enough where the worms have space to go up and down. Yes, you don't want it to be shallow and narrow at the same time. Is either it is going to be narrow and deep, or it's going to be wide and shallow. It can be wide and deep too, doesn't really matter much. But you don't want shallow. You don't want shallow and narrow because that is going to restrict the amount of worms that you can have in that bin. So for your deep bins, and if your bin is deep, make sure you have enough holes for airflow in it. So if your bin is deep, you want to make sure that you have enough food scraps, you have enough bedding, and you have enough so that the worms can move around. But what I recommend that you do if your bin is deep is that don't fill your bin with a lot of food source. The food source that you're going to fill your bin with, it cannot be food scraps, because if you have far more food scraps than the worms can eat in a particular period of time, you're going to have it becoming anaerobic, it's going to be smelly, it's going to become acidic, and you're going to have a lot of issues. So what you want to do then is to fill your bin with bedding, and you want to have a mixture of bedding at that point in time. You don't want to have the type of bedding that is going to compact, because that is going to be another issue all to itself. So you want something that is going to allow airflow in the bin. And while it is allowing airflow in the bin, it's not going to be compacting, and the worms are going to be able to move about and do whatever it is that they need to do. So large amount of bedding in a deep bin and small amount of food scraps. You just keep adding the food scraps based on what the worms need. Oh, hi, Chanel. What's up there? Let's see. Kin says, good, thanks. Happy to hear you live. Okay, okay. Let's see. Alicia says, love it. Okay. Yeah, so for you, Alicia, and your questions, I know that this is a lot of information, and sometimes getting a lot of information all at once can be overwhelming. So if you have questions, you can always reach out to me. My email address is always in the description section of my videos. I didn't have it on my live today, but my email can be found in the description section of my videos. So you can reach out to me and ask your questions, or I have videos covering all of these points that I just discussed. So you can always check out those videos. Yeah, so you don't have to be overwhelmed and try to remember everything. You can always go back to those videos for the answers or reach out to me. Let's see. Oh, Shen says my mama is awesome. And Anne says, yes, she is. Oh, thank you, my dear. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Yes, Alicia. Yeah. So don't be afraid to reach out. I'm a bit overwhelmed at the moment with a lot of things that I'm trying to get done. But if you reach out to me, I'll do my best. I will read your email and I will get back to you as quickly as I possibly can. So don't be afraid to reach out, because that's what I'm here for. More and more, I think all gardeners should know about worm farming because it's just awesome. I keep saying that, and but it is the truth. Worm farming is awesome. The benefits of it is just wonderful. So don't be afraid to reach out, and I'll do my best to assist you in whatever way I can. You're very welcome, my dear. Lots of notes. Okay, you're taking notes. Okay, cool. That's a good way to do it too. Yes, I'm always taking notes. As you might notice, I have quite a lot of papers here with me at the moment because I'm doing constant research and always trying to learn all that I can about worms because I don't know. I think the whole world needs to know about worms because when you think about worms, most times people will think about them in terms of okay, if I have worms, I'll have castings and the castings will help my garden. But then there is so much more to it than that. For example, we know how it is said that worm farming is actually therapeutic and relaxing. Gardening is relaxing and therapeutic. Now, there is something about looking after that worms that just makes you feel so relaxed. When you're worm farming, you don't really think about the cares of the day and stuff like that. You're just looking after your worms and all of that. So it is quite fun looking after them. And if you are like me, the crazy one, I'll spend a lot of time talking to my worms. And if I do something that I think might harm them, for example, I forget to feed them on time, or not forget, but too busy to feed them on time or to maintain them on time, then I will apologize to them. Yes, so yes, but and then the next benefit is apart from that, it helps us mentally and help us to have a chemical-free garden and help with some pest in our garden is that it reduces the waste in the landfill. And I cannot stop stressing this enough because prior to me doing vermicomposting, I had no clue just how bad it is because I would think that, okay, um, it's food scraps. It breaks down easily. So why should food scraps be a problem in the landfill? But then I wasn't thinking about it from the different perspective where when your food scraps get into the landfill, it is going in among all the other garbages that are there. One of the most important thing to breaking down food scraps is oxygen. So when all of that garbage get compressed in there with all of those food scraps, there's no airflow. So those food scraps that would normally take a few weeks to break down may take years to break down. And then we end up with methane gas and all sort of negative effect that we do not want. So vermicomposting is really important, and I think more and more people should learn about it because not only are we helping ourselves and our garden, we're helping our community and we're helping to save the planet as well. So vermicomposting, everyone should know about it. And for those who are able to, it would be awesome if we all could get involved with it. Now, I know that not everyone is going to have that interest, and not everyone, even those who are interesting, a lot of them may not have the means to do so, the time to do so, or the space to do so. But yes, let's see. Alicia says, lots of notes. Can we review this live? Yes, the live is available for replay. So you can always check it out. It's always there on my channel. Let's see. And White says, yes, Lisa. And Lisa, Lisa says, recently got into this. To think I used to squish them. uh, Poor little wormies. Yes, but now you know better, right? Now you see them and you try to get them in your garden if they weren't in your garden. Yes, but these little guys are just awesome. They do so much more for us than we actually do for them. Oh, you used to squish them. Yes, it's that's how it is. When you don't know, you just don't know. But now you're having them, you're raising them. So I think you're making up for all those times when you used to squish them. Yes. These guys are fun to have. I can't really see myself without having a worm farm if I'm going to be growing a garden, and I can't see myself not growing a garden. When I started with my worm farm, I bought a pound of worm, as I was mentioning before, and I put them in my outdoor worm bin. And in the space of 2.5 months, the lady said to me that I bought them from said to me, they will double their population, at least double their population in 3 months. I had them for 2.5 months outdoors, and then it started to get cold. So I had to bring them indoors. When I brought them indoors, I separated them from the castings. I was so shocked. I had 20 times the amount of worms that I started out with. I've never seen that number ever again. Ever. Not once in the six in the 6 years that I've been vermicomposting. And I don't know what it is about that particular time, why there was so much. I don't know if maybe when I bought the worms from her, maybe I had lots of adults, lots of juvenile, lots of hatchlings, lots of cocoons in there. And maybe that's what made the difference. I don't know, but I've never seen. But even so, if that was the case, why aren't my worm bins giving me 20 times the amount now? I don't know what it is about that time that made them multiply like that. And the funny thing is, I speak to her constantly, and I spoke to her the following year after I bought the worms from her, and she said, you know what? My worms are not multiplying at the rate that they used to. I'm like, oh, I thought it was me. I thought I was doing something wrong. So I don't know if it is something in our climatic condition that changed because we're constantly having changes and they just don't go back to being as good as they were. So I don't know if that is what is the issue. But after that year, when I talked to her every year, she said, nope, they are multiplying and they're multiplying a lot, but nothing like before. So I don't know if it has something to do with our environment, but 20 times the amount. Now, here is a mistake that I made, and I don't want you guys to make the same mistake. That 20 pound of worms that I got, I had them for a very short period of time, and then that was it. I didn't know that they require a lot of space. So I had two 76-liter totes. And in those two 76-liter totes, I had 10 pounds in one bin, 10 pounds in the other bin. I didn't know that the surface area of the worm bin matters. And I didn't know that if you're not going to have the right surface area per pound of worms, that the content of the worm bin needs to be higher. So these worms didn't really have anywhere to go, and they didn't have enough material. So they started regulating their population. And then every now and then I go in my basement and I would notice that I'd find a dead worm here, a dead worm there, because the adults were leaving the bin so that the younger ones could survive. So that was my mistake. I lost out of that 20 pounds of worm, and I brought those worms indoors. That was the end of August. By the end of March, I had 4 pounds of worms out of that 20 pounds of worms. So don't make that mistake. The space in your worm bin matters. If you want to have a lot of worms, you have to make sure they have enough space, whether it is going to be surface area per pound of worms, or whether it is going to be the volume of material in your bin, but your worms need space. So don't make the same mistake because it is heartrending. It is very heartrending to see all those worms dying off. So don't make the same mistake. Please don't make the mistake. Now let's see where we're at. Alicia says, I fish and have some in my backyard. Oh, okay, awesome. I've never really used my worms for fishing. Not yet, and I've had them for 6 years. I don't know. Every time my husband says, Marcia, are your worms ready for fishing yet? I'm like, nope. They're never ready for fishing yet. But anyway, I don't know. I think maybe I'll try them out this year. I want to raise the Canadian night crawlers for fishing. I don't really want to raise the other worms for fishing. My African night crawlers definitely cannot be used because even I don't go in the water here because I wouldn't put myself in a refrigerator, and the water here is colder than a refrigerator. So I don't go in the waters here. So I know that the African night crawlers that I have would not do for fishing. But it would be interesting to see how my European night crawlers and my red wigglers do. So I think maybe this year we'll put them to the test. Let's see. I can touch one, but not a pound. Okay. Well, if you have problems touching a lot of them, you can always get yourself a nice thick glove and put it on. Then you don't have to feel the wiggly. If you get a thin glove, you may be able to feel it to some extent. But if you get a nice thick glove, like your regular glove that you would use to clean your washroom and stuff like that, then you won't be able to feel them wiggling on you. But as time goes by, you might get very used to it. You might not even need to wear a glove anymore. I have several different types of worm bin. I started out with, as I was saying before, in my outdoor bin, it was just a pallet, bin made from pallet. And White, you make me laugh. Not the euros, please. I know you love your European night crawlers, but I mean, they are the most suited. They're bigger than the red wigglers, and yeah, the fish want the bigger worms. Hush, my dear, hush. You're probably wishing you never send them to me, right? But the fish got to eat too, and I got to eat the fish too. Yeah, so as I was saying, Alicia, I started out with worm bin. Well, it was a compost bin, really, made from pallet. And after that, I started use the 76-liter totes. So I have a few of those. So that's what I'm keeping my African night crawlers in at the moment. And I have the 55-gallon drums. Yes, the big 55-gallon drums. I have my European night crawlers in that. And I'm thinking of putting my African night crawlers in that as well because they like to burrow down. Night crawlers love to burrow down. So they rather have deep bins than shallow ones. So if you're raising Euros and other night crawlers, it's better to have a deeper bin than a shallow one. But in general, most of my worms are kept in cement mortar trays, is the right term for it. Yes, so most of my worms are in mortar trays in my garage. Yes, so I'm thinking of putting my African night crawlers in the 55-gallon bin, but the only problem I have is my garage is heated but not warm enough for African night crawlers. So if I have them in a 55-gallon bin, how do I get them out of there in the winter? Because chances are they're going to have to be inside my home, and I don't want to have a big, ugly 55-gallon bin inside my home. So I'm going to have to figure that out. I might have to make some modification to my garage in terms of heating, maybe put another furnace in there or do some in-floor heating in there. But time will tell what decision I will make. First, I have to get my husband to agree to vacate the garage and probably use my shed for his stuff, and then I can get the garage. Because if that is the case, then I can put the in-floor heat in there and raise my worms in there and not have to worry about sharing the space. But we'll see. Let's hope he agrees to go with that. Let's see. Let's see. And says, no, they're not. Give them something else to eat. What can I do for you, son? Nothing. I'm on my live, you know. I don't know what it is. You want what? One of your favorite snacks, but I don't know. One of your favorite snacks, but you don't know where it is? My live will be finished soon, and then I'll come and give you some snacks, okay? Okay. Close the door behind you, please. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. My little boy, he's 4 and he's like an horse. As soon as he finishes one thing, before he even finishes, he's asking for something else. And he's so little, I don't know where he's putting all of that food, but it's going somewhere. Let's see. Alicia says that is a lot of scraps for that 55-gallon drum. Isn't the garage too hot? It depends on where you are. I'm living in Saskatchewan where the temperatures can feel like minus 55 for a few days or a few weeks in the winter. So, yeah, in the winter it can be pretty cold. And then the way my furnace, because when we bought this place, the garage that came with it, we haven't done anything to it in terms of changing the heating or anything in there. And the way the heating is set up in there, it is by the front door. And it's just the furnace, open furnace, and there is no duct carrying the heat anywhere else in the garage. So one corner of the garage is getting all the heat, and the heat is up top. There's no heat, no vent or anything down low. So all of that heat is just blowing up top. So everything other corner in the garage is cold, and just that corner here by the furnace is hot. So that's where I have my worms, but then the space is not enough to maintain all the different type of worms that I have. And then I don't really want to I don't mix them. So I don't keep my African night crawlers close to my red regular bin or to my European night crawler bin because I don't want the bins to be mixed. So because of that, it's not where I would have to put the African night crawlers is not hot enough for them. So that is the challenge that I'm facing at the moment. In fact, last year, February, I lost 14 of my bins because any bin that was on the lower shelves froze. Yes, so it's not hot in my garage at all. I wish it was because then I could turn some fans on or something and cool it down. But yeah, that's what I have to deal with. But I'm getting there. Every year I do a little bit more improvement on it. So eventually I will get it to that point. So I know what to do. It's just that it takes time to implement what needs to be done. So your garage would be too hot, Alicia, because you are in zone 9B. They would die in your garage. Okay. Yes, my garage is too cold. Maybe we should swap, right? You want my garage, but you have to send it with the heat in there, and I'll send you mine with the cool air in there. I don't know how we'd maintain that, but it would be a nice swap, right? Yes. So for my 55-gallon bins with my worms, I don't fill the bin. Well, sometimes I do, like in the winter, because I know how cold it can be in my garage. So I would have lots of bedding in there, and then I'd have the worms and a little food scraps that I give them every now and then. But then the rest of the bin at the start of the fall, I would fill it all the way to the top with leaves. And then over the following months, those would settle, and then I would add more to it again because that is what saved the European night crawlers last year when the worm bins froze, because this bin was actually on the colder side of the garage. I don't usually have worms over there, but that is the only spot I had for it at that time. So that bin froze as well from the bottom. It started freezing up, and I had it, I think, 12 inches off the ground on a stand, 12 inches off the ground, and it still froze. So the only thing that saved those worms was the fact that I added all those leaves to it in the fall. So the worms were able to go up into that upper section and hide out. So that is actually what saved that bin, thankfully, because I'd be crying tears now. I do cry for my worms, when things happen to them, I shed tears, bitter tears. So, yes. So now I make sure that every time it comes around to winter, I don't keep worms on my lower shelves anymore because I don't really want them to freeze. And if I know that the temperature is going to be super cold, I would put my additional heating in there on the floor to keep those region warmer. But at the same time, I still won't put any worms down on those lower shelves because you never know what's going to happen. And I don't really want to have a repeat of what happened because it is heartrending. Let's see. Alicia says, "Wow, do you feed them anything from the feed store other than scraps?" No, I do not. I am all about recycling. So if I have to purchase food to feed my worms, chances are they will not be getting any. It's all about recycling. So whether it is recycling what I have or recycling what other people have, then, but yes, it's all about recycling. That's my focus. And then, I don't know, I just, I can't see myself going out and buying. I do buy cornmeal and top up their food with that from time to time, but that's as far as it goes in terms of buying stuff to feed them. Yeah, but I don't give them anything from the feed store. I think I may need to go that route eventually as my companies continue to grow because I might not be able to source enough food for them otherwise. But until I'm at that point, then no, I'm not purchasing anything to give to them. So I was collecting food scraps from a restaurant last, that would be last year, that would be 2020. Yes, I was collecting food scraps from them and I get tons of food scraps. I'd get like 15, a minimum of 15 gallon of food scraps from them per day. Not per day, twice per week. Sometimes I like each trip I'd get anything from 15 gallons up to 37 gallons of food scraps from them. But because of the pandemic, I stopped going because, well, better safe than sorry. So I stopped going. So I lost that source. But they are pretty good with that. So I guess I could always go back to them with that. But then because I was having issues in my garage, I need to change the door that's there because we still have the old door that we bought the property with. So I need to change that out because mice are able to get in and they're wreaking havoc on my worms, eating out my worms. So I stopped feeding them a lot of food scraps because I don't really want the worms to be eaten by the mice. So yeah, so I've been feeding them other things to keep that under control. Yes, cornmeal is good for them. Everything that is organic is good for them. But cornmeal, you know how the cornmeal is like when you had a little water to it, it swells up. So it is rather filling for them and it fattens them up. So it is good for them. Yes, you can give them cornmeal. Oh, if you want to feed them on just cornmeal, you can feed them on just cornmeal. It's up to you, my dear. Yes, they will eat whatever organic matter you give them. So oats, in fact, the way I do my worms, everything from my pantry goes in there. The only thing I don't give them is milk and cheese and uh, meat. But everything, if I have flour and the flour gets stale, I give it to them. If I have oats, if I have peas and beans, if I have peanuts, anything I have that if it expires, I just grind it into a powder and give it to them. It doesn't really matter because that is what they were created for, to eat up all the organic matter and to give us poop for our garden. So I give them everything, everything. When I have like my pumpkins and squash and I harvest those, I take out the gut of the pumpkins and the seeds, everything together, and put it in my processor, blend it, give it to them. So they get everything. There's nothing that I hold back from them apart from those things that they don't recommend you put in your worm bins. And it's not that they wouldn't eat the cheese or the milk or the meat. They do eat those things and they love those things. The only thing is that it invites pests and they do get stinky. So that is the reason why you wouldn't really put them in your worm bin, and because it takes a long time for them to process things like the meat and stuff. But if they could process it fast enough, you could actually feed it to them. But to be on the safe side of breeding bacteria in your house or your garage or wherever it is and inviting those pests, then we don't give it to them. But it's not that they wouldn't eat it. Oh, yes, you can give them the eggshells and coffee grounds as well. Okay, you're welcome, Han White. Yes, so the coffee grounds, the eggshell, all of those things are good for them. Those serve as grit for them. But if you are in Florida, so if you're going to be given coffee grounds, I'd recommend that you give them in small quantities. And the reason you want to do that is because coffee is very high in nitrogen. Nitrogen produces a lot of heat, and if Florida is hot and you put too much coffee grounds in there, you could be boiling your worms. So just small amount of coffee grounds, not a lot, they'll be fine. Okay. So I say in another 5 minutes or so, I'm going to be saying goodbye to you guys because I need to go look after my worms and then I have a lot of work to do. Oh my gosh. I am so exhausted these days. I don't even know my right hand from my right foot. Let's see. Do the soil needs to stay at the same pH? Do we need to make sure it isn't acidic? Yes, you definitely need to make sure that it isn't acidic. So that you're going to accomplish by adding eggshell, the ground eggshells, or garden lime, and you dolomite lime is what you want to use. And you have to be careful. Make sure that it does not have chemicals in it because the chemicals can be harmful to your worms. So dolomite lime and diatomaceous earth or ground eggshell, ground oyster shell, these things will help to balance the pH in the bin. If you are feeding onions and citrusy food or any food that is acidic, then you want to make sure that you don't put large quantities of those in the bin, just small amounts incrementally, because that too will make the bin acidic. Overfeeding your bin also can make it acidic because if you're feeding them so much that they cannot consume within a given time, the food is going to start breaking down. It's going to become anaerobic in the bin. And when that happens, it's going to become acidic. So controlling the pH is very important because the worms cannot survive in acidic condition. And if your bin is acidic, you're going to have an increase in potworm population in your bin. Not that the potworms are bad, they are good composters, but that's not what you really want. Having a few in your bin is fine, and they will be there no matter what you do. You can't escape that. But you don't want the population to grow out of control because they're going to be competing for the food source. And when you see them, it's usually an indication that your bin is either too moist or too acidic. Mites love acidic conditions, so you might end up with a lot of mites in your worm bin if it is too acidic. Some mites will bite you. Some mites are parasites to your worms, the red mites. So you don't want to have that. So you try to control the pH in your worm bin. You are welcome, my dear. You're very welcome. Yes, so I am actually one of the reasons why I have been so busy is because I am setting up my worm farming business where I'm going to be having tutorials for new worm farmers. So if anyone is interested in that, um, then my videos, I'm going to be uploading videos that has links to those tutorials, paid tutorials. Some of them are paid, some of them are free, and membership will be offered as well. I wouldn't call it a website. I have a domain name, but not a website. So the only way to get to those is through links. I have funnels instead of websites. So that is what I've been working on, why I'm so busy. So if you're interested in stuff like that, then in the future there'll be links to my videos that can take you to those tutorials and webinars and workshops and stuff like that for beginners. Yeah, so that is why I've been so busy. That's what I'm working on, and it is a ton of work. Oh my God, I'm exhausted. Yeah, so anyway, guys, thank you so very much for participating in the live, and it is so good to talk to you guys about these worms. I miss that. I know I haven't been doing as much with my channel these days. I really, really miss talking to you guys. So thank you for being here and participating and making it so much fun. And then I hope to see you guys again, all being well, on Monday. So take care. Have yourself a wonderful weekend. Make sure you don't overwork yourself. I wish I could take my own advice, but I don't have a choice at the moment. Make sure you take some time to relax, stay safe, and happy worm farming.